Imagine you're standing at a busy intersection. Your goal is to cross the street to get to your favorite lunch spot. Your task is simple: cross the street and eat. But traffic is heavy. Maybe you should wait for the light and not give in to your growling stomach by cutting across to the other side, light or no light. The risk to you is clear. Nothing like getting hit by a passing car to ruin your lunch plans. You're probably not even considering other risks, such as how your fellow pedestrians could be injured when cars on the street swerve to avoid hitting you. In the end, your assessment of the situation leads you to decide to be patient and wait for the signal to change before crossing. A wise move, and a common example of something you do every day without being aware of it. A basic concept presented here to help protect you and the people you work with. The detailed process covered in this program, based on the concept just described, is the result of a commitment to improve safety performance.
Like I said, we do this 1,000 times a job. We want to make sure we do this one safe. We're not worried about the next one. We're not worried about the last one we made.
How? Through the adoption of a universally accepted approach to assessing risks or hazards before starting the work. The approach is called the Job Safety Analysis Process. Today, many companies use the Job Safety Analysis Process, or JSA. Depending on where you work, you may hear it referred to as a Job Hazard Analysis, or JHA, Job Hazard Breakdown, or even a Job or Task Risk Assessment. In this program, we're going to use the term JSA. Whatever your company calls it, the JSA is a very effective means of helping reduce incidents, accidents, and injuries in the workplace. It's an excellent tool to use during new employee orientations and training, and can also be used to investigate near misses and accidents. A JSA is a procedure which helps integrate accepted safety and health principles and practices into a particular operation. In a JSA, each basic step of the job is examined to identify potential hazards and to determine the safest way to do the job. Some companies prefer to expand the analysis into all aspects of the job, not just safety. This approach, known as total job analysis, or task analysis, is based on the idea that safety is an integral part of every job and not a separate entity. The terms job and task are commonly used interchangeably to mean a specific work assignment, such as operating a grinder, using a pressurized water fire extinguisher, or changing a flat tire. JSAs are not suitable for jobs defined too broadly, for example, overhauling an engine, or too narrowly, for example, positioning a car jack. The major advantages of this method are that JSAs do not rely on individual memory, and that the process prompts recognition of hazards. For infrequently performed or new jobs, observation may not be practical. With these, one approach is to have a group of experienced workers and supervisors complete the analysis through discussion. An advantage of this method is that more people are involved, allowing for a wider base of experience and promoting a more ready acceptance of the resulting work procedure. Initial benefits from developing a JSA will become clear in the preparation stage. The analysis process may identify previously undetected hazards and increase the job knowledge of those participating. Safety and health awareness is raised, communication between workers and supervisors is improved, and acceptance of safe work procedures is promoted. The completed JSA, or better still, a written work procedure based on it, can form the basis for regular contact between supervisors and workers on health and safety. It can serve as a teaching aid for initial job training and as a briefing guide for infrequent jobs. It may be used as a standard for health and safety inspections or observations, and it will assist in completing comprehensive accident investigations. 4 basic stages in conducting a JSA are selecting the job to be analyzed, breaking the job down into a sequence of steps, identifying potential hazards, determining preventive measures to overcome these hazards. To start the JSA process, identify the job or task to be performed. Any job that has hazards or potential hazards is a candidate for a JSA. An uncommon or seldom performed job is also a candidate for a JSA. JSA forms or worksheets may vary from company to company, but the idea remains the same. Identify all steps, hazards, and safe work procedures before starting the job. The JSA process has multiple parts. First, break the job into a sequence of steps. Each of the steps should accompany a major task. That task will consist of a series of movements. Look at each series of movements within that basic task. To complete a JSA effectively, you must identify the hazards or potential hazards associated with each step. Every possible source of energy must be identified. It's critical to look at the entire environment to determine every conceivable hazard. Hazards contribute to accidents and injuries. Using the sequence of basic job steps and potential hazards, decide what actions are necessary to eliminate, control, or minimize hazards that could lead to accidents, injuries, damage to the environment, or possible occupational illness. Each safe job procedure or action must correspond to the job steps and identified hazards. Everyone involved in implementing a job or task should be present when the JSA is written. The JSA should be reviewed, approved, and signed by the supervisor before the task is started. Understanding every job step is important. Whenever a job step changes or a new step is introduced, the JSA must be reviewed and updated. Remember, the key reasons for completing a JSA are to encourage teamwork, especially with new employees, to involve everyone performing the job in the process, and to elevate awareness. It is important to realize that the JSA process is not a cure-all fix. Widespread adoption of the JSA approach will result not just in a new standard for the industry, but in improved risk awareness by everyone involved. The result? A realistic expectation of fewer incidents resulting in a safer work environment. JSA is designed to help you understand and implement the risk assessment process easily and effectively. JSA provides the model based upon current best industry practices for replacing or adapting your current system with a process both consistent and thorough. Think again about crossing that busy intersection, or going across town, or across the country. Is it walking distance, or do you need transportation? If so, what kind of transportation? Auto, bus, airplane? If it's a street you're crossing, how wide is it? And what kind of traffic should you expect at the time of day you cross? These types of questions may seem trivial, but they focus attention on the process, the job you're about to begin, and not on distracting thoughts like how good your meal will taste at the restaurant across the street. This is a fundamental part of the JSA process. Good company practice and common sense dictate that all work tasks should be subjected to an assessment of their risks. Why? To identify existing or potential hazards, assess the risks involved, and identify the controls and precautions necessary to undertake the work safely. Here we can see how the JSA process fits into the work management process by describing the generic methodology followed when work is to be initiated. Here are the main steps. The first action is to establish what an identified task will involve. This initial appraisal should identify the need for any special studies or assessments and identify at the outset if it is clearly obvious that the task cannot be completed safely. If the likely hazards cannot be resolved at this stage, then the task should be rejected or redefined. The next stage represents the heart of the JSA process. It involves identifying the hazards associated with the task, assessing the risks, and identifying the controls or precautions required to reduce those risks. Where a task comprises a number of separate activities, these should be broken down into individual tasks and assessed separately and individually. The extent of the controls identified will depend upon the level of risk associated with the task. The higher the risk, the greater the degree of control required. Under JSA, a new risk assessment may not be required for every task. When a task has previously been risk assessed or is covered by a procedure, it may not need a new risk assessment. When this is the case, the previous assessment or procedure should be reviewed to ensure that the hazards and controls are still relevant and that any job site or job-specific controls are identified. For low-risk tasks performed by competent people, no formal recorded risk assessment is required, since the individual's competency and skill covers this activity. However, a worksite assessment is still required to determine if the task can be defined as low risk. Prior to beginning the task, the appropriate approval should be sought and a pre-task talk should be held. This toolbox talk is essential to communicate the hazards, controls, and individual responsibilities to the rest of the work team and engage everyone involved in the final stage of the risk assessment process.
Thread protectors, what's pinch points, don't attempt to remove.
Involvement of the team is an important opportunity for the whole work team to identify any additional hazards and controls, especially those specific to the site and local conditions. Once the task begins, it is important to monitor the work site for any change in conditions that might alter the hazards and controls in place. If there is any concern, stop the work, reassess the controls, and, if necessary, replan and reassess the job.
Do not take the straps off until you...
After completing the task, it's important to make note of any lessons learned and make improvements for next time the task is done.
Be sure and discuss our JSA.
When a work request is received, the first part of the process is to define the parameters of the task. This is the responsibility of the supervisor, meaning the person responsible for seeing that the work task is completed. An examination should be made to determine exactly what the task involves. Careful consideration should be given to the need for any special safety studies or assessments, such as COSHH, control of substances hazardous to health regulations, manual handling, or others. Whether it is immediately obvious that the task cannot be completed safely and should be immediately ceased. If the likely hazards cannot be reconciled at this stage, then the task should be rejected or redefined. What personal competency requirements are needed of those who will assess the risks and perform the task. Assembling the right team is an important part of a safe job. Once the initial examination is complete, the supervisor should determine which appropriate category the task fits. Is it a new task, a task previously risk assessed and/or covered by existing procedures, or is it a low-risk task? A new task is any task not previously performed or assessed. New tasks should be subjected to a JSA before beginning, unless the task has been categorized as a low-risk task performed by a competent person. A new risk assessment is performed when all risks are identified and assessed in detail, and controls are identified to reduce the risk to as low as reasonably practical, or ALARP. Other reasons for a new assessment may be that it is simply physically impossible to comply fully with all recognized standards, or when previously used controls are not sufficient or practical. Any new task should be subjected to a new risk assessment, with the formation of a suitable team to perform the assessment. The manager or supervisor should nominate a JSA team leader and agree together on the composition of the team. The size of the team will vary according to the complexity of the task. For example, one person can assess relatively simple tasks. However, regardless of numbers, all teams should include personnel who are responsible for the task, are competent to conduct JSAs and have the ability to facilitate the process, have sufficient knowledge, expertise, and competence in the task to be performed, and an understanding of the hazards it presents, will be involved in completing the task, have specialized knowledge of the task where it is relevant or appropriate.
Any bracing up here you do.
This requires knowledge and experience of the area, plant, equipment, or system to be worked on, and an awareness of the hazards involved and their potential consequences. Team members should also have an understanding of any relevant procedures and industry standards. When appropriate, specialists should be nominated as team members to provide technical advice, such as process, electrical, or instrument engineers, lifting and manual handling specialists, or others. Depending upon the location of your worksite, many regulatory and governing bodies may have placed requirements and laws affecting your proposed task. These requirements typically include references to the completion of task-based risk assessment. Before you begin the job, you should become familiar with all applicable regulatory requirements. If any questions arise, you should contact your supervisor or health, safety, and environmental advisor. Let's look at the principal responsibilities of managers and employers. Eliminate and reduce risks wherever practical. Combat risks at their source. Ensure suitable and sufficient assessment of all risks to the health and safety of all employees and any third parties, such as contractors, caused by their work activities. Ensure that assessments are recorded, reviewed, and maintained as valid. Ensure that an appropriate approval process is in operation, commensurate with the level of risk assessed. Give appropriate information, instruction, and training to employees and ensure competence of involved personnel. The principal responsibilities of supervisors are to review each task and identify what level of risk assessment is required. Ensure that all tasks undertaken within their area of responsibility are assessed to identify any hazard that may cause harm or damage. Ensure that control measures are implemented to reduce the likelihood of a risk occurring to as low as reasonably practical, or ALARP. Reject or redefine the activity if residual risk is too high after being reduced to ALARP. Residual risk refers to the risk that remains after all the identified control measures have been put in place. Ensure that any potential improvements highlighted during the assessment process are reviewed and implemented as appropriate. Communicate details of the JSA to the work team, allocating individual responsibilities for job tasks and controlling measures. Ensure that all members of the work team have the opportunity to identify further hazards and controls. Ensure that before work commences, all members of the work team are in agreement with the detail of the JSA and the proposed control measures. Ensure that any lessons learned are captured to improve the task or the JSA. The principal responsibilities of JSA team leaders are to lead the team in performing the risk assessment. Ensure that the team understands the assessment process and what it is trying to achieve. Take responsibility for the quality of the JSA. Ensure that the assessment team includes personnel with all the necessary knowledge and competence for the task involved. Ensure that the team is guided systematically through the assessment process and is kept on track. Ensure that the JSA includes a worksite visit where possible. Ensure that the detail of the assessment is agreed by the assessment team. Ensure that the detail of the assessment is recorded and that records are updated as appropriate. The principal responsibilities of individual team members are to actively participate in any JSA related to the work activity. Help identify hazards and control measures to reduce the likelihood of an incident occurring. Assist in the identification of any deficiencies in the work process, and also communicate possible improvements. Those actually carrying out the job task have a crucial part to play in the JSA process, including understanding the hazards and control measures associated with the task, actively monitoring their work sites and surrounding area for any changes, stopping the work at any time if they become concerned about a potential safety issue, sharing knowledge and contributing towards the pre-task talk or toolbox talk, identifying any lessons learned from the job. Before beginning the JSA, the team should take care of all preparatory work to ensure that team members have enough background information to base their judgments upon. This should include reviewing the overall work program and breaking it down into a sequence of small tasks. Then the team should visit the actual work site if possible. This is important so that team members can see the physical layout of the area and current site conditions. The team should pay special attention to other plant equipment in the vicinity. Other activities taking place or planned to take place concurrently should be identified since they can cause other impacts upon the JSA. During this initial examination, the team should consider several key points, including what is the purpose of the task? What are the critical activities necessary to perform the task? Who is going to complete the task, and are they skilled enough? When is the proposed task to be executed? Could it be accomplished at a different and possibly safer time? Where is the job to be performed? Could it be carried out at a safer location, such as in a workshop? Are there simultaneous operations that have a significant safety impact on the task, such as other tasks happening as part of the same scope of work or in an adjacent area? What are the characteristics of the plant and systems directly involved? It may be useful to document the steps to be taken and make notes for discussion during the JSA session. The primary goal is to enable a constructive and safe decision to finally emerge. The team should list all significant hazards and then review them to determine what foreseeable effects they could cause if not eliminated or controlled. This should be done through an entire group discussion under the direction of the JSA team leader to ensure that all members are given adequate opportunity to express their views. The team attitude is most important here, and each member must be encouraged to participate in the process. The team leader must allocate sufficient time to allow all hazards to be identified and assessed in order for well-thought-out decisions to be reached.
Between
A hazard risk table, like this one, is a useful tool to ensure that no hazards are missed. And remember, a record should be kept of all decisions reached. While identifying the hazards, it may be necessary to consider other specific assessments, including those previously done or required. This could include COSHH, manual handling, PUWER, provision and use of work equipment regulations, and LOLER assessments, lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations, or system isolation requirements. Where this is the case, any controls identified should be incorporated into the overall controls identified for the task. Once all the hazards associated with the task are established, the consequences or hazard effects and people who may be affected need to be identified and considered. As well as those directly involved in the task, don't forget others who may become affected, such as other personnel working in proximity to the area where the task is being done, or visitors to the work site. Your company may use a job safety analysis card as a tool to guide the JSA process. The analysis card is designed to lead the discussion through the necessary elements to be covered. Many different forms of the card are in use and can be shared, borrowed, or modified from other companies. It is simply a means to express the risks associated with a particular task as a value, like a number, and then judged whether or not the risks are within an acceptable limit.
This particular system is
What is important is that whichever tool is used, it should guide the team to assess when the risks are too high for a task to be undertaken safely. Once their risk rating has been determined, the next stage is to identify the controls that are required to reduce or control the risk. In identifying control measures, first consider the task, then the people involved. Next, the tools, equipment, and materials to be used. And finally, the working environment. The JSA team must work systematically through the list of hazards to specify all the methods needed to control each of the associated risks. These measures should be based on good, safe working practice in order to reduce risks to ALARP. Once all the controls have been identified to reduce the risk, the following final questions should be asked. Have all the necessary control measures been fully and effectively identified? Are any additional competencies required to complete the task? Is the risk effectively controlled? An assessment of the residual risks should be made for each of the hazards on the basis that all control measures have been put in place. If the residual risk is unacceptable, additional control measures should be identified. If further control measures reduce the risk to an acceptable level, they should be recorded with the new residual risk rating. If further control measures cannot reduce the risk to an acceptable level, then the task must not proceed and the team must refer back to their manager or supervisor. If the residual risk is acceptable and ALARP, the JSA team will recommend that the work should go ahead with the identified control measures in place. However, our goal is that agreement is a unanimous decision of the whole team. Consider this for determining the acceptability of a risk. The greater the perceived risk for any particular hazard, the greater the number and quality of independent controls needed. Also, be alert for the possibility of combined effects from the interaction of several different hazards. This is one of the most challenging aspects of the risk analysis. Not surprisingly, good communication is essential to the success of a JSA. This cannot be overemphasized. The value of the risk assessment will be wasted if the people carrying out the task are not fully aware of or do not thoroughly understand the hazards and the precautions put in place. Open, two-way communication should take place in an informal toolbox meeting prior to starting the job. The toolbox talk should fulfill 4 functions. First, it should give everyone involved in the task a thorough understanding of the detail of the activities involved in completing the work, both for their own activity and others, the potential hazards identified for each stage of the task, the control measures in place or to be put in place to mitigate the hazards, individual actions and responsibilities at various stages of the task. Second, the pre-job safety meeting or toolbox talk should provide the opportunity for all involved in the task, either wholly or partly, to identify further hazards and control measures which may have been overlooked in the initial assessment. This is especially useful for identifying hazards at the worksite, which may not have come to anyone's attention in the earlier stages. Third, it's important to reach agreement of the whole work team on whether to proceed with the activity. If agreement cannot be reached, do not start the job. Fourth, make clear to all involved that should conditions or personnel change or assumptions made when planning the activity prove false, they should reassess the situation and, if in any doubt, stop the job. Whatever system or tools you use, it should cover the same elements. When new work team members join the team, the same communication must be given to them. It's critical that the processes we've just described are followed in detail. No piece of paper or signature will make a job safe. Only by everyone having meaningful involvement and a thorough understanding of the task in JSA will the risks involved be minimized. And that, of course, is the very purpose of the JSA. Once the team is satisfied that all the hazards have been identified and that suitable controls have been put in place to reduce the risk to an acceptable level, they can then undertake the task. Although controls may have been implemented, the work team should not become complacent. By monitoring on an ongoing basis, the team should always be aware of any changes in personnel, such as crew change, changes in conditions at the worksite, or if the JSA is found to be incomplete or incorrect. If it becomes necessary, they should reassess the task, and if in any doubt, stop the job. Once your company has fully committed to the JSA process, here's a key point critical for success. Any individual has the authority and responsibility to stop the job. Any individual. If anyone concerned about the safety of a task stops the job, that person's decision must be supported, even if the decision turns out to be based on incorrect reasoning. Being critical of the individual in such a situation will increase the likelihood of the next job not being stopped when it should have been. It is essential that all persons involved in an activity are made fully aware that they have both the authority and the responsibility to stop the job if there is any doubt about the safety of the operation. Supervisors have a crucial role in this area. They must make clear to all individuals in the work team that they will be fully supported when taking action to stop the job. An individual who stops the job when there is concern over the safety of the activity should be recognized as doing their job correctly. Any concerns a supervisor may have regarding productivity must not be expressed at this time. Safety must always take priority. Many incidents happen when conditions are not as planned or when there is a deviation from the work plan. It must be made clear to all personnel, especially during toolbox talks, that when conditions change, the expectation is that the individual or work team will stop the job and reassess the situation. Only when the reassessment indicates that the risks can be made ALARP should the task be restarted. If you think conditions are unsafe, don't wait for someone else to stop the job. On completion of work, it is important that any lessons learned are captured and incorporated into the process. This may be in the form of changes or revisions to the following: procedures used, risk assessment records, the JSA process itself. This is an important feedback loop in the JSA process. Wherever possible, a post-JSA review should take place in order to establish any deficiencies or weaknesses within the risk assessment process. This will provide feedback into the management of a safe system of work. Equally, where improvements to working practices can be identified, they should also be fed back into existing procedures. In the event of an incident or near miss taking place, it is critical that the JSA be reviewed. The findings from incident investigations, near-miss reporting, and procedural review are good sources of lessons learned that can be applied to the JSA process.
Help reduce the hazard.
Well, you've got established procedures for one thing. If it's a task that's...
Effective training of individuals involved in leading or participating in JSA is essential to achieve quality and consistency of results. No matter how thorough the JSA procedure has been, its ultimate success depends on the awareness of the people carrying out the activity. If they do not have a sound understanding of the JSA findings, what it means to them, and what their responsibilities are, it will have a limited effect on preventing incidents. You can find many examples of robust and fully operational JSA processes in place throughout industry. However, the importance of a JSA is not based upon which of these specific processes is used. What is important is the rigorous process of hazard identification, risk assessment, the reduction of risk to an acceptable level before the work is begun. Finally, the main points of the JSA process can be summarized as follows. The JSA process is not an exercise to justify carrying out a task. Appropriate risk assessment must be carried out for every task. Everyone involved in the JSA process must know their roles and responsibilities. The assessment team must include the right people with the right competencies. Everyone involved in or affected by the task must have input into identifying risks and controls. At any stage, if anyone has any concerns over the safety of carrying out the task should be suspended and the risks revisited. Lessons learned during completion of a task should be recorded and revisited the next time a similar task is to be performed. The overriding goal of the JSA process is to challenge our attitudes about completing a proposed task. It really is important to expand our thinking, to include team input in identifying all hazards. The end result is a high-quality job and a healthy work team ready for the next task. Remember when your mother told you to look both ways before crossing a street? Well, guess what? She was right, even if she didn't quite know just how right she really was.